Hello and welcome back for another VMK in the game development series. In this VMK we're going to continue working with the console window, but this time adding a little bit more excitement to it. Previously what we've done is we've created a yellow window with a white bar along the bottom that when you type keys on the keyboard you can see the letters typed into the console along that white bar. Now what I wanted to do is to replace that yellow rectangle with something more interesting like a texture. With a texture you're able to put in any kind of graphics and things like that, as well as you're not limited to placing just a regular rectangular white bar. Instead you can make something really fancy. So to do that, let's go into our code and begin. We'll need a couple new variables. So let's open up scene.h and scroll down to the member section, and I'll put it right here on the very bottom. We're going to need a variable that contains the ID number of the texture which will be containing the image that we want to display over top of that console window. The texture itself I created inside PaintShop Pro here. All it is a 1024 by 2024 square. It's completely white except for this stuff here in the top left hand corner. If we zoom in here, you'll see I created a window that is 100 pixels tall by 800 pixels wide, and I've made sort of a bar along the bottom. This is where the text is going to show up, and sort of up above that is a little bit more area just to have stuff display here. Now what I've done is I've added an alpha channel to this as well, so that this part up here is a little bit transparent and you can sort of see a checker pattern in behind here. You'll see it a lot better once we render this inside of our game engine. But the bar down here does not have any alpha, so it's completely opaque. You will not be able to see through this part here. You can choose whatever image you like, but I just used these sort of leaves because at the time I was playing Far Cry and I was surrounded by a jungle, so I was inspired to make sort of a jungle looking console window. Alright, so you see what the texture looks like. I've named it GUI.tga and I've saved it inside our textures directory. So under resources textures we have GUI.tga located right here. Now we have our variable here which is going to contain the ID number to that texture, and we need to go inside of scene initialize to load in that texture. So after we load in our font, we're going to load in our texture. We create a new texture, pass in false, quality factor 4 and false. And again, these things here, MIP mapping is turned off and solid is turned to false because we are using an alpha channel. We check for errors, and if there are no errors, we then set our member variable for the texture ID number equal to whatever the load texture function returns to us. And we're passing in resources texture GUI.tj into here. Now we have our texture loaded, and hopefully if it's loaded successfully, this value here will be non-zero. If this is 0, then that means an error occurred in here. Because we created a new member variable, we need to go and initialize this inside of our constructor as well. So don't forget to do that. Here's our constructor. Let's just set this guy equal to 0. Now we need to go into ConsoleRender and make some modifications down here. We're going to take all of this code here and actually put it inside of an if statement. So if our GUI texture ID number is less than or equal to 0, so either it wasn't loaded or there was an error during loading, then we're going to default back to our regular yellow rectangle with the white text input area down here. However, if we do have a texture, then what we're going to do is enable textures. We're going to bind this texture ID to gl_texture2d, and then we're going to render a quad. Quad itself will be white in color because we need to use the exact colors that's saved inside of the TGA file. And then we specify our texture coordinates and our vertex coordinates for our quad. We're called GL end and then called GL disable to disable the texture 2D. Now, The texture image is saved in the top left-hand corner of our 1024 by 1024 texture. And the bottom left-hand corner of this image is located at 0, 924. The texture image itself is 800 by 100 pixels, so 800 wide, 100 pixels high. With all this information, you should be able to go through and calculate all the texture coordinate values that I show here. 0.9023435 is equal to 924 divided by 1024. 0.78125 is equal to 800 divided by 1024. If you're not sure where I'm getting these numbers from, go back into the texture tutorials and you'll see how you get these normalized values for the texture coordinates. The vertex values are the same as what we had up here before for this guy. We don't need to render a white rectangle because the white rectangle is now saved inside of our texture. So let's save this and build it and run. So there's our car, and there we go. Notice that our texture is now draped over top of our window. But there is one thing we should go in and change. The way that our code is written now is it depends on the window size to show you the size of the console window. And this could be a problem because our TGA file has a fixed size for this texture. So unless you want to be stretching this image whenever we're changing the size of the window, we're going to have to modify the code ever so slightly. First of all, let me show you the stretching that I'm talking about. If I go into, where was it, user settings, and inside of the constructor we specify the resolution of our window. Let's change this to 1024 wide by 768 tall. Now when we render this, you'll see that the console window is actually stretched to fill the entire width of the window, because that's what we told it to do. And you can see that the image itself is fine vertically, but horizontally it's actually stretched. If you had something inside of the texture that was perfectly circular, you would see that the circles are actually now stretched to be ellipses. To fix this, what we want to do is go inside of our initialize, or I think it was our constructor. Yeah, it's our constructor here. We can specify our console parameter width, position, maximum, and minimum. Well, instead of overriding the width to be equal to this value here, what I'm going to do is remove this completely, and the console parameter had a constructor itself. Let's go take a look at that in here. And inside of the constructor we specify the width and the height. Well, we know that the image is 800 by 100, so let's change this to be 800 by 100. Now when we go and render our console, it's always going to be the exact size of 800 by 100, independent of the size of our window that we run it in. So there we go. We see it fills in only 800 by 100 size area there. And if we were to quit this and change our user settings back to 800 by 600, our console window will now completely fill in the area. Like so. So there we go. It's a relatively quick VMK showing you how to add a texture to the console window. If you're finding my videos helpful and you can support my website, you can do so by going to the store and purchasing any of the items found there, or by buying a membership, in which case you can then download the VMKs quicker. You can also support my website by donating some money using the PayPal icon, or by clicking on any of the Google ads found at the side.